Welcome to my world. Ever since Nathan asked me to preach, I feel like I've been living in the outer limits. Who am I? I'm a believer in Jesus Christ and a man in recovery from alcohol, drug, and sexual addiction, and my name is Steve. Thank you, Celebrate Recovery Warriors, for helping me to feel welcome here today. A little bit about myself. I grew up in the church. I was active in Vacation Bible School, youth group, and I worked at a Christian summer camp for many years. When I was 13 years old, I discovered alcohol and drugs. I was still active in church, but leading a double life between God and drugs. This continued even after college, getting a good job in Southern California, getting married, and having kids. I was still active in church as a youth group leader, a worship leader, and even as an elder, but I kept on using alcohol, drugs, and sex to numb my feelings and hide from myself. After 25 years of that, it came to a screeching halt when my wife told me that she was done. But God had other plans for us. I quit drinking and drugging. I got sober and established a new relationship with Jesus Christ, being the Lord of my life. I attended Alcoholics Anonymous and Celebrate Recovery. I became a leader in Celebrate Recovery, and after several more years, they even let me start teaching about the 12 steps of recovery and how Jesus Christ has worked in my life. After 15 years of being sober, my company transferred me to Heath, Ohio, and I brought my recovery with me. I've lived here for 7 years now, and I continue to be active and teach and celebrate recovery. That same wife and I started attending here about 6 months ago, and we joined last month. Although I enjoy teaching at Celebrate Recovery, I've never thought of myself as a preacher. I mean, really, me? Are you kidding me? Do you see how I came in here this morning? So what am I doing here preaching on a Sunday? I'm glad you asked that, because I've been asking myself that question a lot the last few weeks. Well, Nathan heard me teach a couple times at Celebrate Recovery here, and since all the pastors are gone this week, he asked me to preach. I thought, he must be crazy. You're probably thinking, he must be crazy. And you know what? Nathan might be a little bit crazy, you know? I love him anyway. I love anybody who's a little bit crazy. But I've learned over the years that when God presents an opportunity to me, that I would be a fool not to grab it. Never mind how scared or incapable I might feel. I found that God uses people who are available, not necessarily people who are capable. So I'm available. Are you? So today I'm going to teach a little bit about Samson. Why Samson? Well, when I was a kid, I loved that story about a strong man taking revenge on those people who have hurt them. And it didn't hurt that I felt smarter than him hearing how he got duped. As an adult, I couldn't be any more different than Samson. Samson had super strength. He's not allowed to drink alcohol. He had long hair, and he was a womanizer. So I want to give just a little bit of a backstory before I talk about Samson and Delilah. See, Israel had escaped the Egyptian captivity, but they still had a tendency to stray away from God. So God provided the judges to rescue them so that they would return to worshiping the one true God. But Israel would get comfortable, just like when I get comfortable, and when that judge died, they would turn away from God. But God is really patient. You know, Israel would begin to suffer some consequences, and then they would cry out for help. God would hear them, have compassion on them, and provide another judge to rescue them. This would go on and on, right? Israel would fade away, they would cry out to God, God would rescue them, Israel would fade away. They would cry out to God, lather, rinse, and repeat. So there were 12 judges over 480 years. Samson was the last one of them, and he was so bad that he was the last one of them. He was probably the worst judge of all of them. So at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel, and God brought Samson along to rescue them. Samson was given superhuman strength by God after being raised as a Nazirite. Now, being a Nazirite means that you take these certain vows and you follow them. And there were basically 3 vows. The first vow is that he would never touch alcohol. The second vow being that he would never touch a corpse, a dead body, a dead anything, and that he would never cut his hair. But when Samson grew up, he more or less just does his own thing. You know, God has a plan and a purpose for his life, but Samson chose to follow his own way. But God is merciful, and he allowed good things to come about despite Samson's choices. Samson doesn't lead the Israelites out of the Philistine rule. He follows his own selfish desires, and when he actually does confront the Philistines, it's more or less by accident. I think it's kind of a comment on the free will versus God's sovereignty question. Here, God had a plan and a purpose for Samson's life, but Samson didn't follow it. Samson chose to exercise his own free will, but God is still sovereign, and he allowed good things to come out of that. So Samson had a bad habit of looking at women that didn't belong to him, right? He catches sight of a Philistine woman, and he decides that he wants her for his wife, which was forbidden by God because he knew it would distract them from him, and they would start to follow the false gods that the Philistine women had followed. So on his way to pursuing that woman, he rips this young lion into pieces because he's so strong, right? He can do that. That's how strong he was, just rip. And later on, he's walking by again, and inside this corpse of a lion, he finds a beehive filled with honey. So what does Samson do? He eats the honey out of the corpse of the lion. Hello? Do you remember what your vows are? You're not even allowed to touch a corpse, let alone eat something from outside of one. And he took it one step further, right? He fed that honey to his parents, thus defiling them. So not only did he break that vow, he pretty much just blew it out of the water. But God is patient, and God stayed with Samson. But don't mistake God's tolerance as permission to continue sinful behavior. That's pretty much what I was doing when I was still drinking and drugging and going to church. I thought I wasn't having that many problems with it, so it must be okay. But it wasn't. So Samson goes to the feast to marry this woman, and the Hebrew word that they use for feast at this occasion implies that there was a lot of drinking and drugging, or not drugging, a lot of drinking. Thinking about myself too much. So there's a lot of drinking going on at this wedding, right? And nothing about Samson's character leads me to believe that he would abstain from drinking and getting drunk during this feast. So he not only broke another Nazirite vow by drinking alcohol, but he broke a general Jewish custom of not marrying outside of the Jewish people. But God remained patient, and he continues to be with Samson. So then during this wedding, Samson decides to trick his new friends with this riddle about the lion and the honey, betting that they wouldn't know the answer. But his new wife ends up betraying him after she entices the answer out of him. And so Samson lost the bet. But God still used Samson to fight the Philistines. He goes to another Philistine town and he kills 30 men to pay off the debt. And in his anger, he decides to leave his new wife there and go back and live with his parents. Now there begins this story of revenge upon revenge, where Samson's wife is given to another man, so Samson destroys their crops, and then the Philistines burn his wife and her family down. So Samson's like, well, if that's the way you're going to play it, I'm going to kill a whole bunch of you. So he kills a whole bunch of them. And that kind of upset the Philistine people a little bit. So Samson goes into hiding outside the town of Judah, and the Philistines come around looking for him. And, Samson's a Jewish guy, right? You would think that these people in Judah would help hide him from the Philistines, but no. Samson's leadership abilities are so bad that his Jewish people in the town of Judah hand him over to the Philistines. So, what does God do? Opportunity, right? Samson breaks through his bonds, he picks up the jawbone of an ass, and he slays 1,000 Philistines. I hope the irony in this story isn't lost on you. Samson continues to do his own thing, visiting prostitutes and wreaking minor havoc on the Philistines until one day he meets Delilah. Which brings us to our Bible story for today. You can find it in Judges chapter 16, starting at verse 4. I'm just going to get comfortable here. Later, Samson fell in love with another Philistine woman named Delilah. When the Philistine leaders heard about this, they spoke to her in secret. They offered to pay her 1,100 silver coins if she would reveal the secret of Samson's power. So she agreed. "Samson, my love, tell me how your power can be stopped," she said one night.
"If they tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings, I cannot get out," he said.
That night, as Samson slept, Delilah did just that. But when the Philistine soldiers came to grab him, he easily broke the strings and slipped away. The next night, Delilah asked him again for his secret.
"If they tie me with new ropes, I will be caught,"
he said. After he went to sleep, Delilah tied him up. But when the Philistines came, he again broke free and escaped. When Samson returned to Delilah, she asked him again, "Samson, tell me no more lies. How can you be defeated?" Samson told her if someone wove 7 locks of his hair into a loom, he would have no power. Delilah did this, and the Philistines attacked, but once again, Samson escaped easily. "Samson, if you love me, you will tell me your secret," Delilah finally said, and Samson told her the truth. "If you cut off my hair, then I will be weak." That night, as Samson slept, Delilah called in a barber to cut Samson's hair. This time, when the Philistines rushed into the house, Samson's power was gone. When his hair was cut, God's power left him. The Philistines binded him, put him in chains, and threw him in prison. The Philistines blinded him, right? They actually gouged out his eyes. Samson suffered terribly in prison. The Philistines made him work hard and gave him little to eat. But nobody noticed that Samson's hair was starting to grow back. Uh-oh. One night, a large group of Philistines decided to have a party. They brought Samson from the prison so that they could mock him. Samson prayed to God as he had never prayed before. He prayed to have his great strength back just one more time. He reached out and grabbed 2 huge pillars that held up the house. Samson gave a great cry, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed against the pillars with all his might. The power of God returned to Samson. The entire house came crashing down, and many, many Philistines died with him that day. Yay, God! God had given Samson a great gift. His wonderful strength, his long flowing hair stood for his power and his promise to God. But Samson came to love his power more than he loved God. When his hair was cut, Samson learned a terrible lesson. He learned that his strength came from God and that God is stronger than even the mightiest of people. Woohoo! So I may not be as strong as Samson, or as good looking, or have luxurious flowing locks of hair, but you know what? I'm pretty sure I'm smarter than him. I mean, how stupid can one person be? But yeah, that's what happens when we get blinded by our own sinful desires. You would think that after Delilah tricked him 3 times, he wouldn't fall for it again. But that's our definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And this wasn't even the first time he was betrayed by a woman. Remember that first woman he married who gave up the secret to his riddle? Yeah, so you'd think Samson would learn the lesson. So the Philistines cut his hair, and after Samson broke the last of his 3 Nazirite vows, God left him to face the consequences of his actions. This wasn't God's plan and purpose for his life, but Samson followed his own character defects to his own great demise. But God is still faithful, and when Samson cried out to God, God heard him and provided one last revenge on the Philistines, killing all of their rulers. The actual passage in the Bible states that all of the Philistine rulers were present at the party. So God used Samson to deliver the Israelites despite his actions, not because of them. And because of that, God becomes the hero of this story. So I want to just touch a little bit on Samson's character. Right? First of all, Samson exhibited really poor leadership. He was called to lead the people of Israel out of the Philistine rule. But he never led them anywhere. I mean, it was so bad, they wouldn't even help hide him from the Philistines. Also, Samson was filled with his own selfish, self-centered, and self-seeking of his own sinful desires, without care for the vows that he made to God, or obeying God's laws, or even following God's plans. He was also consumed with lust, with getting these women he didn't even know into bed with him, just because he liked the way that they looked. One of his big ones is he's just filled with pride and arrogance. He thought his strength would save him from his poor decisions, because a lot of time his strength did save him from his poor decisions, until God's power left him. I think probably Samson's biggest problem was he was ignorant or in denial that his weaknesses would bring about his failure and his death. So I'd like to compare this story to another story in the Bible about a man with a weakness. His name was Paul. Perhaps you've heard of him. When he started out, his name was Saul, right? Like Samson, Saul started out being devoted to Judaism. While Samson was a Nazirite, following those 3 Nazirite vows, Saul was a Pharisee, strictly following all the laws and traditions of the Pharisees. He was a well-respected and honorable leader of the Jewish religion, whereas Samson could not claim any honor or respect from his people. God continued his plan and his purpose for Samson despite his actions, while Saul rose up in opposition to God's plan and purpose by persecuting the Christians. Then Saul had an encounter with Jesus Christ. God changed his character, and he changed his name to Paul. Paul went on to serve Jesus and wrote somewhere between 25% and 50% of the whole New Testament. That's a big impact on the world, let me tell you. Let's take a look at what Paul had to say about his weakness in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 5 through 10. You can follow along if you like. I like to use my phone for the Bible. I know a lot of people don't like that. I don't care. I like having my Bible with me everywhere I go, especially when I pull it out and there's a message from Pastor Jade saying, "Let's go, Steve." Hi, guys. Hope you returned safely. So 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 5. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself except about my weakness. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, right? And a lot of people wonder what this thorn in his flesh was, but I don't think it really matters that much, and I don't think we're meant to know, because a lot of us get a thorn in our flesh. So anybody who feels that way can relate to Paul in this situation. I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it from me, but he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." That's right. Paul was given a weakness so he could serve God better. Imagine that. I always thought we needed to be talented or spiritually gifted to serve God in a powerful way. And you know what? We are called to use our talents, and he does give us spiritual gifts to serve him and to grow his kingdom. And I think the church today is really good at doing that. We seek out people with gifts and talents so we can serve God in the most excellent way possible. My wife and I started attending this one megachurch in Southern California that put on quite a show during worship. It was complete with all these special lighting effects and fog machines. It was almost like being at a concert, you know? At first, it turned me off a little, but then I realized they were just doing their very best to worship God. And if you had the ability to do all that, why wouldn't you? I mean, why is it easier to raise your arms, wave your hands, and shout for joy at a rock concert than it is at church? Like another great man talked about in his sermon recently. I suppose we just don't want to be a distraction, or we don't want to inhibit somebody else's worship of God, and that's fair. And you know what? Our worship band up here did an awesome job leading us in worship today. I really felt that. And really, what more do we need than that? The problem comes about when our pride begins to swell our heads bigger than it should. We may begin to think, like Samson, that it's our own strength that accomplishes these mighty works. Before Saul became Paul, he was persecuting the Christians, even to the point of stoning a disciple of Jesus named Stephen, the first martyr. This is where I come into the story. My name is Stephen, and I got stoned too. But in a different way, if you know what I mean. But even when I was in the middle of my drinking and drugging days, God used me for his kingdom. Without going into too much detail, I was serving God as a worship leader, and one time I had to give the children's sermon based on this scripture, 1 Timothy 6:10 through 11. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, gentleness, love, faith, endurance, and gentleness. I had no idea what to do, and being the addict that I was, I just procrastinated, and I didn't come up with anything. So Saturday night, I'm kind of in a panic because I got to do this the next morning. So I prayed that God would give me something, and God was faithful even when I wasn't. I had a dream of what to do for the children's sermon. So the next morning, I threw it together quickly, and it went something like this. First of all, I made these little signs that had all these big words on it, righteousness, godliness, etc. And then I invited the children to come up to the altar, and I gave each one of the kids one of the signs, right? So this kid gets righteousness, this one gets endurance. But one of the kids, I had a sign that said money. So I gave that to one of the kids. And another sign that said more money, I gave that to the same kid. And another sign that said even more money, I gave that to the same kid. And then I asked the kids to follow me to the kingdom of heaven, except there was one difference. The kid that had all the money had to do it with a blindfold on. So I had all these kids wander around the church with me, and it was somewhat comical watching the kid with the blindfold stumble around. And you know what? It came out really great. I even had people tell me after the service that they got more out of my children's sermon than they got out of the pastor's sermon that day. Yeah, I was that good. I was so proud of myself that the next time I had to teach a children's sermon like that, I decided I could do it on my own strength. And you know what? I promptly fell flat on my face. So God used me even in the middle of my weakness. And today, being a leader and a teacher in Celebrate Recovery, I can relate the story of my weakness in my addiction to help other people. By showing them the error of my ways and what I did to recover from my addictions and compulsive behaviors, I found freedom from my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And it's easy for me to remain humble when I talk about the wreckage of my past. And what do I mean about being humble? You know, it's not about humiliation. It's not about being embarrassed by the mistakes I made. It starts with being teachable and realizing that even today, I might not know the best way to do something or the proper way to act even, and actually listening to other people who are willing to help me grow and become more like Christ. So what's my point? I'm glad you asked. My point is that God can use us despite our choices and in the middle of our weakness, just like he used Samson despite his weakness, just like he used Paul with his weakness, just like he used me by relating my weaknesses. Samson's great folly was being unaware of his weakness and becoming arrogant in his strength, thinking that it came from him and not from God. Paul was given a thorn in his flesh so that he might remain humble and thereby serve God even greater. So what is your weakness? Do you know what your weaknesses are? If not, you might be doomed to follow a path similar to Samson. Are you struggling with some secret sin or some behavior or even some thought pattern that you think isn't that bad? Are you selfish wanting what you want when you want it? Are you self-centered, thinking that everything that happens is about you? Are you self-seeking, always trying to manipulate and control the situation so you get the outcome you desire? Is fear preventing you from pursuing God's kingdom on a daily basis? Are you struggling with honesty, even to the point that you're just lying to yourself? You know what denial stands for, right? Don't even know I am lying. These are all common character defects that many people deal with, and defects of character that we deal with at Celebrate Recovery every week on Monday night. So how could we possibly use these defects of character, these weaknesses, for God's glory? Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. First, we have to stop pretending that they don't exist. We bring them into the light and grace of God's redeeming love. God's light provides the healing power we need to overcome. And we ask God to work through our weaknesses. That's basically steps 1, 2, and 3 right there. And we need to stop expecting God to heal us before he can use us. I always thought I had to clean up my act and then I could get around to doing God's business, right? My problem was I could never clean up my act. And God wants to use us right where we are today. And when I open myself up to God, he will provide the opportunity I need to serve him. You know, during my first year in recovery, I got really excited about working on my character defects. And I decided to come up with a plan of my own to create the best version of me possible. So I took all these areas of my life, right? Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational, financial, marital, family, job, yes. And I came up with all these goals for all those areas. And for each goal, I had a bunch of activities. And for each activity, I had an action plan to do them. It looked a lot like this because this is it, in fact. So I decided that if I just did these 100 things, I would get better. But I think you can figure out that trying to keep a hold of all 100 of those things up there was pretty much impossible. But you know what? God had another plan for me. And my daughter wanted to participate in our church's Christmas musical that year, and I got elected to give her a ride to the rehearsals. So I brought a book along with me. I promptly sat in the corner of the room, and I read my book, because you know what they have at those rehearsals? People. I didn't like other people, and other people really didn't care too much about me either. So I sat in the corner reading my book, and the choir director says, "Hey, Steve, why don't you come over here and be an ice fisherman?" Because we all know how important a role the ice fishermen play in the Christmas story. It was a play the church wrote themselves called Angels Unaware, and it was really kind of a cool play to get involved with. So I was asked, I was presented an opportunity, and I said yes. And I found out by just doing that one thing that God put before me, he addressed every single one of these areas in my life. You know, the mental area, I had to remember the words to the song. I had to remember the place on the stage to be. I had to, remember the steps to the dance, but I didn't even call it dancing back then. I just called it moving to music because, I would never dance on stage. You want to see a little bit? Actually, we never used that move in any of the musical I was in. But it was just amazing to me. I'm like working with other people. I'm talking to them. I'm relating to them. I'm learning some social skills. I'm involved with people who love me just the way I am. We're working together on a spiritual journey. We pray before every rehearsal. We're delivering a message about God's kingdom to a whole bunch of people, some of which are just there for the entertainment value and don't even know God. So God took my list of 100 different things to do, and he reduced it to just one action. I'm telling you, that was a lot easier than my list was. And that one action led me on a very exciting and fulfilling part of my life in an area that was never a strength or a gift of mine. You could probably tell from my dance move. But I went on to participate in over a dozen musicals and plays over the next 14 years. And each one was a rewarding experience for me. And it's not really about the performances. It's about the people I meet and the people that respond to it. Like this guy, Brian, who saw the play one year, showed up to celebrate recovery a year or two later, and he remembered me up on stage being a cabbage farmer that year, because we all know how cabbage farmers are important in the Christmas story. And Brian was struggling with crystal meth. But he knew where to go when he had had enough. And to this day, Brian is still clean and sober. So that was awesome. And I've heard lots of stories of connections like that. And it all just started by saying yes to an opportunity that God placed before me. Kind of like how I'm up here right now preaching today. And the funny thing is, God will take that weakness and he turns it into a strength. One year in that Christmas play, I actually had the lead role and they had me singing a solo. Yeah, if you hear me sing, you would question their decision then too. They never asked me to sing a solo after that either. But I'd like to think that I'm a decent speaker today, and something I never thought of pursuing in my life has become so gratifying. I've really come to enjoy the times I get to teach at Celebrate Recovery, and it all started by bringing my weakness, my addictions, into the light and allowing God to work with me there. So, how can you use your weakness to serve God? Aren't you glad I asked you that? I don't know. God isn't limited in how he will use you. I just know that he will. And when he does, he gets the glory, and you will have the most fulfilling experience in your life. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Some people tried to help me preach today, which is great because I'm not a preacher. Nathan gave me all these commentaries to read, so I chose the thinnest one, read that one.
You did wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to preach like Robert, because when Robert was up here, he was so confident and smooth and so practiced. He was just so good at it. But you know what? I can't preach like Robert. I can't preach like Nathan, because I'm not them. I thought a lot about what I wanted to say up here, so much so that I even wrote myself into the sermon. I'm not sure real preachers do that or not, but that's what I did. Talk about being self-centered, like Samson. Maybe I'm not so different after all. Maybe if I thought more today about what you needed to hear, you might have gotten more out of my sermon today. But you know what? I think God can use what I say anyway. In the end, I decided to play to my strengths, and I just wrote a script, and I read from it. I know I'm teaching about using your weakness for God, but guess what? We get to bring our strengths along with us too. It's not just about using our weakness for God, but bringing our best along with us too. I do just want to add one little caveat about saying yes. Some people have no problem saying yes. In fact, they have the exact opposite problem. They can't say no. We like to call that codependency, and we deal with that over at Celebrate Recovery on Monday nights. Come on over. We'll be happy to see you there, and you will be loved. We now return control of your church service to you. Until next week at the same time, when the control voice will take you to the outer limits.